Listen up, get ready, I'm not gonna take no more. There's a revolution, a revelation going on in my soul. Buckle up, get ready, we're not gonna sit back.
Citizens of the world, welcome to Live from the Heartland for the week of February 20th in the year 2026. I'm your host, Michael James, and I'm glad that you're joining us. Wherever you're listening from, wherever viewing from, wherever you're at, wherever you're going, we're glad that you're hooking up with Live from the Heartland. I'd like to start off by giving a shout out to our engineer, Hal James, who turns 35 yesterday. That would be the 19th. And without Hal, we would not have such a wonderful product, so to speak. So if anyone would like to make a donation to the show, contact us at the Live from the Heartland at livefromtheheartlandshow@gmail.com. Today, we're going to have three guests. We're going to bring on Katy Hogan. She is a producer of the show and sometimes host, longtime host. When back we did it from the Heartland and when we went downtown, and even when we started doing it with Zoom. Katy's going to come on and talk about Jesse Jackson, probably talk a little bit about activism in the streets around repression, ICE, etc., and maybe some tips going forward for things that we might all participate in. And then we're going to be joined by Floyd Webb and Peter Hudis. Both of them have been on the show before, and they're going to talk about Frantz Fanon. There is a film about Fanon that will be showing down at the University of Chicago, and we are going to hear a little bit about that and a little bit about Fanon himself. One of the things I'm very concerned about is the U.S. blockade of Cuba. Having visited there a couple times and been a longtime fan of Cuba, I recognize that the U.S. has been trying to steamroller Cuba's government out of existence for about 70 years. And they are now trying to keep Cuba from getting oil. I do have a little bit of interesting information on where Cuba does get its oil from. Let me see if I got this right. They need about 11,000 barrels of oil a day, and they get 40,000 through their own production. Venezuela has been sending 27,000 barrels a day, and Russia has been sending 6,000. Mexico also has reduced theirs while they're negotiating and trying to see if they can continue to support Cuba. Couple other things about Cuba. We are trying to work out a way to do a show direct from Cuba, and our friend Pablo Menendez, the leader of the band Mezcla, who's been a longtime visitor on the show and played at the Heartland Cafe for many years off and on. He is going to do a video about things and conditions in Cuba, and we'll have that soon. People should know that there is a flotilla that is in the works called NuestraAmericaflotilla.org, and they are sailing to Cuba, bringing critical humanitarian aid for its people. It will take place in March, and it is a humanitarian and solidarity mission, hoping to break the blockade, and we'll see how that goes. We will keep you posted. With that said, I'm going to take a short musical break, and we will come back with our first guest, the one and only Katy Hogan.
Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. For the union makes us strong. When the union's inspiration through the workers' blood shall run, there can be no power greater anywhere beneath the sun. Yet what force on earth is weaker than the feeble strength of one? But the union makes us strong. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. For the union makes us.
Citizens of the world, welcome back to Live from the Heartland for the week of February 20th in the year 2026. And it's always a pleasure to bring on my good friend, my longtime business partner, and a partner in the show off and on, Katy Hogan. Hello to you, Katy.
Hey, Michael. Good morning.
How you doing today?
Well, it's another beautiful spring day in February. So, those times where we have to go, okay, don't get used to this.
No, it's beautiful. I was sitting with my shorts and a T-shirt out drinking coffee on the back porch for just a while. Anyhow, here in Chicago, and it affects, I think, the country and the world, a longtime civil rights advocate, the one and only Jesse Jackson, who here in Chicago, we've known him well for a long time, his activities and his work. And Katy has had some close interaction with him. I think they were at a Democratic convention together way back. Fill us in a little bit, Katy, about the importance of Jesse Jackson and the loss that we all will experience.
Well, I actually feel like he certainly filled out his years. He just died at 84, which is a pretty great long life for a Black man born in South Carolina in 1941. I mean, he did as much as possible, and we should be celebrating because he hung in there through his illness. And as many have pointed out, even when he couldn't talk much anymore, he would still show up in his wheelchair. But my first brush with Jesse Jackson was when I was in high school, and he was running Operation Breadbasket. It was before Push, but just. And it was a great opportunity back then. My little Catholic group, Young Christian Students, was addressing racism as best we can. And could at the time, and it was not easy because we were pretty much surrounded by the institutionalized racism and segregation that ran Chicago in the 60s. But here was this voice. We already had a hero in Martin Luther King Jr., and then there was this young upstart, and he spoke really well. He was riveting if you got to hear him speak. And I can't actually recall the details of Operation Breadbasket because so many visits to Operation Push later sort of buried that. But I will tell the time of the Democratic Convention, because this is the thing. Jesse Jackson was omniscient. I mean, he did things before there was an anti-apartheid movement. He was doing that. Before there was a stateside mixed race support for a two-state solution in the Middle East, he was doing that. He was, even with Breadbasket was the first step where the mission of the civil rights action shifted to a really business-like approach to business, to saying, we need jobs and income. What are you going to do for us? And if you're not, we're going to boycott you. So early on, I think it was milk companies, and then it was Pepsi and Coke, and he would get 3 of the big sodas and boycott the other 2. Incredibly impressive organizing, really, for the time, and very successful. He had as much as any single other African American in our city to do with helping build the middle class, the Black middle class. When Harold Washington won in 83. A lot of people, I'm noticing in all the writings, that Jackson gets big time credit, as he should, for registering voters. But I want to remind people that Harold Washington's voter registration was 3-pronged, and it involved our other friend, the late Slim Coleman, and his colleagues, who did an amazing job working with Jackson, and also Miguel del Valle, who is still with us, but also initiated deep and pervasive registration growth in the Latino community. So anyway, when Harold won, and council wars began, and Harold, who had also been in Congress, having been sent there with the most votes of any of the other sitting congressmen, knew Washington politics a lot. And by the time the convention was rolling around and decisions were needing to be made, he was already Mayor Washington was a little underwhelmed by the organization of the National Party and their addressing the urban platform that he was putting forward. So we, in Chicago and nearby suburbs, we ran the Harold Washington Favorite Son slate in the March primary for Harold Washington. So in addition to the Mondale, and at the time Gary Hart, and at the time, and also Jesse Jackson delegates, we had our little group of delegates, which numbered in total about 45 people, who met every morning with the mayor. It was kind of magical. It was also pretty hectic. That was the moment where, what's his name? Ed, oh God, I'll forget the 60 Minutes reporter who goaded the mayor sitting in our delegation with saying, "Hey, did you bring council wars to San Francisco?" And the mayor actually had to be held down. He was gonna pop him one. But that was also the first time that Jesse Jackson had a campaign for his own nomination. And as we worked the convention floor with these little booklets with the urban platform, we had a lot of folks saying, "I love Mayor Washington, and I don't think we're going to be able to move this into the already set up platform." By the time the week was over and we had to talk about our vote, we had an amazing round the table conversation, which I think I kicked off as a newbie, saying, "What's the guidance here? Is it what is the word? Conventional wisdom to go for the guy who's assumed to win, or what?" And this really fits in with the Wilson. The other thing we'll talk about, but anyway, he went around. Sorry about that. We went around the table, and it was moving. There were tears, and by the time it came back to me, we were saying, "Who are we going to vote for?" And I said, because a lot of them assumed I was going to vote for Mondale. I said, "I'm voting for Jesse Jackson," as was everyone else, and around the table. And so everyone except one of our delegates, who was a little more connected to the mainstream Democratic Party, voted for Jesse Jackson. And when people talk about some of the other stuff, Jesse was a pain in the neck too. He was a big camera hog. The night of Harold's victory in the primary, who was the face you saw almost more than Harold's was Jesse Jackson. It was a mixed bag, Jesse. He was a real challenge. And on the South Side where I grew up, he was hated, absolutely reviled. Because
you're talking the South Side further west.
The Southwest Side, white South Side, yeah. I mean, people hated him because he was so much more of a threat seen by them than any other black people. And he was also a Chicago guy. So he knew what he was doing. When he did the boycott of Chicago Fest, remember that?
Yeah.
Right after we did 2 years. Thank God we didn't do another year because we wouldn't have crossed the picket line.
Katy's referring to in the Heartland Cafe back in our younger days when we were at Chicago Fest. And
of course, for all of the wars for oil, Jesse Jackson was there on the stage with you when we had the No Iraq War thing that Marilyn Katz helped put together. Was he not, or was that only Obama?
Well, I think I know I spoke at that and Obama spoke at that, and I don't remember if Jesse Jackson did or not.
Okay. Well, I saw him 3 months ago in what used to be Daly Plaza, Civic Center Plaza, Daly Plaza, in his wheelchair on the dais. He can't even actually articulate, but he was there to shore up the troops. He's always been there. He's always showed up. And for a long time, this radio show, when I was on it, we had competing radio programs with Operation Push because they would do a live Push broadcast from down at Push headquarters, and it was always right against ours. I used to listen to Push, but then I couldn't for a while until it got probably streaming.
Let me ask you a question about what you think will be missed with him gone. And what might his legacy be? And you know, who else is a formidable Black leader?
Well, I think that there are tons of Black leaders as a result of his work. We white people aren't as acquainted with them as hopefully we will be. You know, back when we elected Harold, the entire city was introduced to one another, at least the political activists of it. And we maintained that as long as he was mayor. That's something that was lost when we lost him. I think that with the passing of Jesse Jackson, I think first of his family, they will miss him the most. He was a true family man and helped, you know, was there for his kids throughout. When Jesse Jr. had his troubles, his dad and mom were right there supporting him. So I think that'll be the biggest miss. I think for all the rest of us, it'll be like discovering all the things he actually did do. I mean, I didn't even mention the going to Syria or wherever to release hostages. And he did that a couple times.
No, he was a hell of a guy. And the last time I saw him was, I think you might have been with me. It was the memorial for Slim Coleman. And he was there. I ran into him two other times. Well, one time we was out at Navy Pier, and I think he and I were both early. And I remember we had a short conversation. And then I have a photograph I took of him and Roman Paczynski. You don't see a lot of Jesse, kind of the back, but Roman Paczynski is surrounded by people with Jesse Jackson, and he's a lot shorter.
Was that at the first Washington inauguration?
Yeah, the inauguration.
At Navy Pier, yeah.
Well, he's going to be sorely missed, and I think that we will evoke his his activity and what he has done for a long time to come. He was truly inspirational. And watching him on TV in these speeches from his early days is something else. I'd like to, you know, you talked a little bit earlier about the importance of voter registration in electing Harold Washington and the different people who worked on voter registration. What's your take now on the need for voter registration, turning out the vote with all of the, the kind of terrible things that are happening under the current president and his administration, and our hope and prediction that something a little bit better will take over in the midterm elections?
Well, coming as I do from the early independent electoral efforts in the 60s here in Chicago, like Singer and Simpson, and then Harold, I have always viewed voter registration as the first step. The first step is making sure you've got voters. So I've recently gotten a bunch of mailings from Ken Martin and other honchos at the Democratic Party alluding to a very large voter registration effort that they have kicked off already, I believe. And, you know, my cynical side wants to say, what took you so long? Because we have a lot of people to register. And what we do know in politics is if you register a voter, they're your voter to lose, really, because you've made contact with someone, you have the ability to recontact them and remind them about the election day and even give them a slate of suggested choosings. So yeah, voter registration is hugely important. And for us right now, this primary, which is the time when people have to actually declare. They have to get a ballot based on party, which throws people off, and I totally understand that, but don't let it. We're, especially now, everybody should be voting Democratic. No Republican sitting should get any votes at all from Republicans. But we have to do a huge voter registration across the country this summer. It would be a perfect summer to have a current version of the voter registration summers of the 60s when busloads of students went south. Well, now busloads of students should go to the close races for Senate. There's a half a dozen that are very be able to push us into the blue again in the Senate, or any of the many congressional races. And what you were referring to,
Brian White had a Facebook post where he talked about the 9th congressional race as well as the Senate race, and he used the term crab barrel politics, where the strongest crab, if the other ones are about to be boiled, is climbing out, the ones that are going in the water are trying to pull him down. He used that analogy to talk about the 9th congressional district, which is our home base.
Yeah, the nasty imagery, right? No one wants to see any widespread and certainly public shooting of each other in the foot by Democrats this season. If
particularly in our district, they're all pretty good candidates,
and they're all being, so far, knock on wood, pretty polite to one another. I mean, there are some follower to follower tangles, but even that is pretty polite. I had somebody sort of kidnap a thread that I started about that picture being used, and that's too bad that they chose to do that, because it was a fairly interesting conversation about the vote until they decided to make it their own and push against a candidate that...
What Katy's referring to is that we had one of the candidates on this show years ago, a couple of years back. And after the show, which was at the WLUW studios, we have a photograph where Katy and I and others are with this candidate. And this candidate has then used that picture in promoting her and not necessarily our candidate.
Yeah, we're not saying that. Not even gender, Michael. Yeah, no, that was a mistake made by a newbie. Unfortunately, they either neglected to or decided not to change it after those of us in the picture asked her not to use that, given that it would be assumed we were endorsing that candidacy. And, I'm not trying to pretend I have more sway than a whole lot of people, but I do have sway with some who always ask me, who should I vote for? And so I had to post something saying, this is not an endorsement. This is, if you pay no attention. But the fight for the 9th CD is only going to get more interesting in the month leading up to it. It's tight at the top. A recent poll to tell us who's in front in the 9th CD, which is the seat held by Jan Schakowsky for over 25 years, is between, at this point, Mayor Dan Biss, I think State Representative Laura Pine. I'm not sure who's in third place. Mike Simmons, our state senator, is very popular with a lot of activists in our district. He may be increasing. But the other person who's that high up is the person who moved into the district in the last year and into the state from Texas 2 years ago. And there's a lot of questions about their appropriateness for the race. Certainly for me, there are. That's my personal opinion.
Well, we're going to be talking a lot more politics. I know we have Don Rose coming on the show next week to give us his sense of where the election is going. We have 1 minute. Katy, can you actually tell people how they might register to vote? I know.
It's easy. You can register to vote a million different ways. You can even go online, print up a form, and register that way. We are like one step away from actually registering, being able to register online. You can also register when you vote. You can wait that long, which I don't recommend, but one of the good rules that Illinois put into effect is that our voters can actually show up with the right ID at the polling place and register to vote the day of voting. But again, because the Republicans are hard at work to try and stifle the vote, and they're serious about it, it's called the SAVE Act. Nothing could be more inappropriately named, but your Congress people and senators are voting on it this week. And I have called twice now to tell them all, remind them all, we don't want this. So this is a very critical election for us to vote in big numbers. For those who have not gone out on the street or that's not your thing, but you are appalled at what's happening from Washington, your biggest effect is casting your ballot.
Right on, Katy. Thanks a lot for coming on, and everybody else, stay tuned here on the left end of your dial or however you're getting live from the Heartland. And we are going to take a short musical break, and we'll be back with Peter Hudis and Floyd Webb. We're going to talk about the inspirational Frantz Fanon.
Oh, yeah. Sure as the sun will shine, I'm gonna get my share now. What's mine? And then the harder they come, the harder they fall, one and all. Ooh, the harder they come, harder they fall, one and all.
Welcome back to Live from the Heartland for the week of February 20th, the year 2025. I'm still Michael James up here in Chicago's 49th Ward. And I got a notice not long ago from our friend Floyd Webb that he was going to bring a new film about Frantz Fanon to Chicago. And that led to us bringing not only Floyd, who is the founder of Blackness Network, that's NUSS, and Peter Hudis. Both of them have been on before. Peter is the author of Frantz Fanon, Philosopher of the Barricades, and teaches a course on Fanon at Oakton Community College. The initial reason to bring you on, Floyd, was because of this film. And why don't you tell us briefly about the new film about Fanon, where it's playing and when?
Okay, well, we're playing Thursday, February 26th at Logan Arts Center at University of Chicago campus. And the address I don't have in front of me. Oh my God.
915 East 60th Street.
915 East 60th. Thank you. That's a real scholar.
And the doors open at 6:30. The film is at 7:10.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So this film, we haven't seen a feature film about people like Fanon. We get lots of documentaries. Matter of fact, we get like 2 documentaries a year about Fanon, but never a feature film. There's all of these people from that period. We got something about Shea. We don't have anything about Amilcar Cabral. And so it was really interesting to see that this had actually happened. And Jean-Claude Bernier, who's just texting me now as I speak, is a young man who's done films like this. He's his first project he worked on in Paris was Hate, Leon. You remember that? It took place in the Paris suburbs. Mm-hmm. It took place in the Paris suburbs, and it had to do with the immigrant community that had been placed out there, so that they basically live in these huge project blocks, and And everything Fanon talks about would apply to that film and to that particular situation. The situation in the Paris suburbs is still like occupation, But this film takes place in 1953 when he goes to Algeria and works in an insane asylum. And maybe you can tell us a little bit about his experiences there, Mr. Hilton, about what he did in that insane asylum.
Yeah, thank you very much. Floyd, I really want to thank you endlessly for bringing this film to Chicago. It's a really amazing opportunity, and the work that you're doing with Blackness and with the film in particular is really outstanding. So thank you very much for your work on this. Mm-hmm. So Fanon comes to Algiers originally not for political reasons, right? Strictly political reasons. The independence movement in Algeria hadn't quite taken off. There was independence aspirations for many, many decades, but it took off about a year after he got there. So he comes in 1953 after initially wanting to extend his work in psychiatry, which he began in France. He went to practice psychiatry among Black people in Africa, okay? He was investigating the psychodynamics of racial oppression. And this is what really the subject of his first book, Black Skin, White Masks, is very much about. He wanted to originally go to Senegal, where they had a psychiatric hospital, but they didn't answer his application letters. So the next best place, he thought, was Lido-Jonville, outside of Algiers in Algeria, where they had a significant hospital. And then he went there in 1953, and he began to practice what's called sociotherapy, which is a series of practices he learned from a Spanish psychiatrist named François Touquelles, who was a Marxist revolutionary activist and psychiatrist who tried to combine issues of practices of social liberation within the clinic, not treating patients as prisoners, not chaining them down, not treating them as subordinates, but trying to get prisoners to develop, psychiatric patients to develop a mind of their own through therapeutic practices that enhance their humanity. And Fanon came to Algiers to practice that sociotherapy techniques that he had already begun to practice in France with Touquelles in Algiers. And he transforms the institution, right? Alice Cherky, who was his assistant in Lido-Jonville, is still alive. I was at a conference in the West Bank in Bislett University last month, where she gave a lengthy talk. She's 70 years later, still as live as ever, talking about her remembrances of working with him in the hospital, which is quite fascinating, the way that he carefully paid attention to the needs of particular patients and began to become increasingly aware of how he had to modify his psychiatric practices given the Muslim population and given the impact of colonial domination upon people in colonial Algeria that creates a very different need for different sorts of liberatory practices than he would practice in a place like France among the colonized. So he was devoted to practicing psychiatry among the colonized to help lift up their self-esteem and within the clinic itself.
Well, I did. You know what? While you guys are talking, I just remember the film, The Battle of Algiers, which is kind of talked about as being one of the greatest war movies ever made. That was about the time that he was in Algeria.
Yes, as a matter of fact, in November 1st, 1954 is when the National Liberation Front, the FLN, sparks an insurgency. And very shortly afterwards, Fanon gets into contact with them through a Pierre Chalet, who was a French radical activist who supported the national liberation struggles going on in Africa. And he becomes, in the next months, surreptitiously, secretly, because he would not have been able to maintain his job without it, becomes connected to the FLN and becomes a follower of one of the leading figures in the FLN. His mentor is Ramdani Habani, who is a radical socialist, a nationalist at the same time, who was one of the main leaders of the FLN. And that tendency of the FLN in WLUW 4, it was called, the section of the FLN, had argued for taking the the revolutionary struggle into the cities, not extending it from the countryside into the cities in urban guerrilla warfare. And Fanon was instrumental in pushing for that move, along with Abani himself. And that Battle of Algiers, the film, documents what happened during the uprising that occurred through the activities and through the prompt of the FLN.
It's a hell of a film. I haven't seen it in a long time, but we used to show it to young kids in the neighborhood back in the Rising Up Angry days.
You know, when I talk to lately, when I mention Fanon to people, you know, it's interesting because they still kind of refer to him in the abstract as nostalgia, you know. But when we say that name, you know, people hear that, they hear nostalgia, they hear controversy, you know. But he was a psychiatrist. He was working in colonial Algeria in the 50s, treating victims of torture. And also talking to the officers who carried out. But he wasn't theorizing from a distance. He was observing how systems of domination operate, you know, not only through law, but through force and through the human nervous system, you know, how humiliation, fear, and hierarchy becomes normalized. You know, his book, Richard of the Earth, it wasn't a manifesto in the abstract. It was clinical notes on how colonial power, what colonial power does to like the society's psyche. I mean, like, and for me, it was real relevant to show because of the rapture and the rupture that we're experiencing right now. You know, Black communities of color in this country have always experienced this kind of colonialism and fascism. We didn't name it that, but it was part of the process. You know. The colonial process and the capitalist process are like one and the same, just about. The way that they extract from communities, the way we're like moved and like switched around. So it becomes urgent right now because his clarity about how power embeds itself so deeply, you know, the things he says, it's like common sense, you know. And he warned us that these systems don't disappear just because flags change. They reorganize, they adapt, they live on an institution, policing models, media narratives, and even how people see themselves. You know, revisiting Fanon today isn't about, you know, returning to the 60s. It's about asking whether we understand the architecture of the world we're living in and whether we're honest about how it shapes us.
Why is his work why does it continue to resonate so much today? It's getting a little bit connecting to why it's important for now. But he did talk about moving from national consciousness to social consciousness. Talk a little bit about some of that.
Okay, you're going to have to help me because I'm not the scholar here. I'm the person that's discovering this stuff based on the material conditions and objective reality that I'm living in now.
Well, that's why we brought Peter on.
Yeah, that's why we brought Peter on.
I wanted to let everyone know that in addition to the film, which is going to be shown on the 26th, I believe, also there will be a panel with Peter and someone else, and imagine you too, Floyd, following the showing of the film.
Yeah.
Well, I think that Floyd already, in a way, provided a good entrance to answering your question, Mike, because we are living through a period of intensified racist oppression. Racism has never gone away in America. There was never a point where there was a turning point away from it. But we're seeing a real descent into barbarism that's defining politics in this country. And Fanon comes alive every time there's a mass struggles that emerge against resurgent racism. We saw this in the Black Lives Matters protests of 26 million people coming out in the streets in 2020. One of the first experiences I had directly on this is when I was first asked to do the book on Fanon. I attended a rally. It was after the killing of Trayvon Martin, etc. And I show up at a small rally in Chicago, and there's 17-year-old, 18-year-old youth carrying a big banner saying, "We revolt because we can no longer breathe," signed by a statement of Frantz Fanon on the banner. So young people were just coming into interest in Fanon to try to understand why they feel they could no longer breathe in America with police abuse, with unemployment, with economic opportunities being denied to them, etc. And the more racism has always been the Achilles heel of American civilization, and it shows itself once again and again and again. And Fanon keeps on coming back into the limelight in light of these conditions. The other thing that really has brought Fanon, makes him so relevant for today, is obviously colonialism, imperialism, genocide, occupation. These are not historical issues. This is happening many places around the world, nowhere more so than in of course, the destruction of Gaza, the ethnic cleansing that's occurring in the West Bank by Israel, the genocide that is accompanying both. And the whole generation now is coming into political maturity, reading Fanon to understand why he focused in The Wretched of the Earth on the systematic violence that's embedded in colonialism, and why the violence of the revolutionary opposition is a reactive violence. It's not a violence of revenge. It's not a violence for the sake of violence. It's a response of necessity to conditions of total dehumanization, because colonialism is a system of total dehumanization. And I think nobody captures that more profoundly than Fanon in his works. And people recognize this. And so in light of what we're seeing in many different parts of the world, but especially in terms of Israel's genocide in Gaza and policies in the West Bank, but also in other places of the world, Fanon just seems to speak remarkably in a prescient way to the persistence of these problems within modern society.
Peter, let me follow that up with, we were talking before the show about your teaching The Wretched of the Earth and Fanon at Oakton Community College. And you had talked about young people in the streets. As a professor, a teacher of Fanon, what is the reaction of the kids in your class? And do some of them start off with knowing not much and then go a long way, or do you get the most politically active, progressive types come into your class?
Well, I wish it was the second, but I get that at times. But yes, I teach. I made a decision to teach at a community college because I want to teach philosophy to working class kids who don't know that they're interested in philosophy and have no exposure to it, because trying to get them to think critically and to look at issues that they may not get from other aspects of their education is a challenge. But that's what I think the beauty of teaching is. And what I find is, yes, most people come into the class having no idea who Fanon is. Some students come in with quite a bit of knowledge, though, by the way, because many of them have been touched by some of the issues I'm addressing, especially students from the Middle East and from Africa definitely know who Fanon is very often, although it's a minority of the students that I get. But nevertheless, what I find is that it's a mixed response. A lot of students stay quiet because discussing racism in America among many white people, let's face it, is something that puts them they don't know how to deal with that necessarily in the beginning, and they get defensive. But as we work through the text and we see what Fanon was, somebody who writes from his lived experience, as Floyd was mentioning, he's not somebody hovering in a helicopter looking down on the earth, right? He's writing always from his lived experience about what it was like to experience racism, what it was like to experience a 4-year-old kid in a subway, in a train car, who used the N-word against him, and the mother being embarrassed about it. Relates these kind of stories that it humanizes these kinds of issues for students. And I find quite remarkable work is done by many of them by the time we finish going through Fanon, in which they relate Fanon's ideas to feelings of oppression and alienation that they're experiencing. And many times it's people who have never suffered colonial occupation themselves, but they can identify with things happening around the world after reading Fanon.
Yeah. Floyd, I'd like to go back to you and get a little more about the film. The film was it was shown in France. You said there was some resistance to the film.
Yeah, you just look. Yeah, it didn't get the wide. A film like that should have got a wide release. There was sort of a lukewarm reception to it. I mean, the French, for all the positive things, when it comes to dealing with their colonial past, they're very, very resistant. I mean, their colonial past hasn't really ended. They have a neo-colonial past. There's there's things that are going on right now in Africa where they've been thrown out of countries, but they're trying to maintain that extractive colonial presence. And they're pretty much still, successful at it. the film was it did show it did show it in Washington D.C. and it showed I think in San Francisco. So we'll be the third place that it's showing in the United States now. So this is a Chicago premiere of the film.
Well, have you actually seen the film?
Yes, I have.
So you had talked to me a little bit about and both of you mentioned there's been documentaries about Fanon. This is the first feature film. Can you go into a little more depth about what is in the film?
Well, what's in the film is the experience that he has going into the mental institution and confronting these people and beginning to treat them like human beings and the pushback he gets because, like my sister was a teacher and she had the same experience. My sister would take the worst students and turn them into the best students, but they had already been identified and already coded as the worst students, right? And no matter what they did, they were never seen. They were never allowed to advance in the eyes of the administration and the teachers. And this is the kind of thing he confronts there, Then he comes under surveillance, and he's it's I don't know how to explain everything that I've seen because I watched it one time and I don't want to give away a whole lot of the plot. You know what I mean? I don't want to give, I don't want to say what happens, but it's what happens in that sanitarium is very important. It's the thing that it's the basis of his book, Wretched of the Earth.
What kind of impact has he had on psychology and other people who practice it? I mean, is it taught in schools and universities here?
Oh, yes. He's had a big impact on what's called social psychology. And for a while, there was even he never associated himself with what was called the anti-psychiatric movement which is predominant in the late 60s and early 70s after his death, R.D. Laing and people like that. Although they drew from aspects of Fanon, a sharp critique of the psychiatric establishment for having a blind spot on racism and also for not understanding the need to humanize the treatment of people who are suffering from mental illness. Fanon would do things like he would have his patients put out like a weekly newspaper. He would have them do film showings. He would have them circulate freely within the institution so they could have conversations with each other and get to learn greater social interaction. These were the kind of things that really were humanistic psychology. And this had a big impact on a lot of practices that people have adopted in the field in the decades since then. He's seen as kind of a trailblazer of that. He wasn't simply originating all this from himself. I mean, he learned a lot from Tokelis. He learned a lot from his patients. He learned a lot from the people he worked with, like Alice Cherky and his other assistants in Blido-Jonville. And then he continued to practice psychiatry when he had to leave Algeria because there was threats to his life. And he practiced psychiatry also in Tunisia and Morocco. So he was a revolutionary all through this period. And he's living, not really separate lives because, as Floyd mentioned, he's treating guerrilla fighters secretly in the basement of the hospital, right? Both the medical problems they're having, but also the psychiatric stress and the psychological impact of colonial domination and the anxiety and the lack of self-esteem and all these other things that surround it. And so he was doing politics, he was doing philosophy, he was doing psychiatry, he was doing education in a way all at once. And it's amazing that he could accomplish so much in such a short amount of time.
Well, some things are popping up in my mind. And, back to Algeria, I'm not sure how it might relate to Fanon, but you did say he got kicked out of Algeria. Also, I remember there was a guy named Ben Bella who was the leader of the revolution, as I recall, and he disappeared. And it's not like Algeria has a real progressive government these days. Can you shed any insight on that, or is?
Yeah, so the FLN was a liberation movement that had massive popular support among the Arabs and indigenous and Muslims and Berbers, Kabyles, that is, in Algeria against the French. But it was a group that had many different tendencies. There were some conservative tendencies, more pro-Islamicist, perhaps you could call it. There was also very radical tendencies. Abani, who I had mentioned, was kind of the leader of the more radical left-wing tendency within the FLN. And Ben Bella came from that wing as well. So Fanon dies just a few months before Algeria obtains its national independence, right? He doesn't get to see the victory that he helped pave the way for. Who takes over are people roughly on the left wing of the FLN who wanted to steer Algeria towards what he advocated in the last several chapters of The Wretched of the Earth, especially the chapter on the trials and tribulations of national consciousness, towards a democratic socialism, some kind of a socialistic transition from national revolution to a socialist transformation, an independent kind of democratic socialism. And there was problems with that from the beginning because the new leaders in Algeria didn't live up to all of what Fanon's values embodied in terms of aspiring for such a thing. But Ben Bella was definitely on the left wing of the spectrum who shared a lot of Fanon's concerns. He was overthrown in a coup in 1965, with the more conservative elements now took over, and he was placed under house arrest for like the next 20 years. And he was pretty much silenced, as were quite a number of other people who were our colleagues of Fanon, were sidelined. His wife, I should mention, remained in Algeria to the end of her life, and she was an avid supporter of the Algerian Revolution, and she supported, continued to defend the Algeria against its enemies, of course, in France and elsewhere in the United States, etc. Tragically, she commits suicide in the 1990s in response to her disappointment at the civil war that broke out between the FIS, the right-wing Islamic fundamentalists, and the Algerian government that killed about 100,000 people, which kind of ruined the hopes of the revolution that had so inspired so many people in the 1950s and up to 1962. But she was somebody who was a major figure in her own right that should be recognized.
I want to thank both Floyd Webb and Peter Hudis for coming on. I want to remind people that the film Fanon will be shown at the Logan Center for the Arts, 915 East 60th Street, Chicago. The doors open at 6:30. We're talking February 26th. That's next Thursday. And it'll be good to see you guys in person. Hopefully I'll make it all the way down there. And I want to thank everybody who tuned in today for listening to Live from the Heartland. You can look at shows anytime you like at youtube.com/heartlandmedia. And want to call your attention to last week's show. We had Jeff Biggers talking about ICE in Italy, and we had Paul Draus talking about Rwanda and the Gordie Howe Bridge, etc. Wow. Coming up guests, we have Don Rose next week. Gordon Thompson's going to fill us in on a little bit of the Olympics. And we have Juanita Irizarry, who's running for office, and Lowell Thompson, who has a new film. They'll be coming on the show soon. So all of you out there, keep doing good in the world. The world needs all the good that we do, particularly that we do together. All power to the people. Over and out. Till next week.
She can. Over the mountain,
Thank you for watching the
under
Live from
the
the
big blue
Heartland
sky,
show.
you got a dream
New episodes
awaiting.
air every Friday
I
beginning
can
at 9
see
a.m.
it in
Central
your
Time.
eye. It may
Episodes
not
air
come
each following Thursday on
easy,
Can
but
TV,
you know
9
you've got
p.m.
a friend.
Sweet Home Chicago.
I'll
on
be
Channel
by your
21.
side the entire
Streaming
ride.
everywhere
Just
else
let me
at
hear you say
cantv.org.
amen. Are you doing?
Audio episodes go live on WLUW
Are you
Saturday
doing
9
the
a.m.
best you
on the
can?
left end of your dial at 88.7 FM or streaming
Tell
everywhere
me, are you
worldwide
doing?
at WLUW.org.
Do it. Are you doing the best you
They're
can?
available on Apple and Spotify podcasts by looking up Live from the Heartland on either platform, and are also broadcast on Lumpen Radio Friday at 9 a.m. on 105.5 FM and streaming at
Too
lumpenradio.com.
done. Est-ce que
I'm
tu
Michael
donnes
James, and I'm glad to have
le
been your
meilleur
host.
de toi-même?
Until next time,
Si tu
remember, do good in the world because the world needs all the good that you do, that I do, that we do together. All
Le
power
meilleur
to the
de
people.
toi-même.
Over and out.
Quand tu l'aimes,
Are you doing the best you can? Tell me, are you doing? Are you doing the best you can?